Well, good morning, Georgiana. I'm Pastor Ryan. Welcome to this week's Take 5. And if I can share briefly as we begin, I just want to tell you, I have so enjoyed the past couple of weeks of holidays together, spending Christmas Eve together, enjoying some new traditions together with our Georgiana family. It is our first year here, but we are looking forward to many, many more years to come of traditions and holidays together. And so we've so enjoyed this time. And so I hope you're already having a great new year. It's just started, but I hope it's already been a great one for you. And as we get into the new year, I want to hit one more prophecy from Isaiah in the Old Testament together. This may be review for you, but Isaiah being a prophet in the Old Testament, he's not really a fortune teller like we might think of prophets today, but a prophet in the Old Testament was really someone who spoke for God. They had a message from God for God's people. And so Isaiah is one of those prophets. And so Isaiah is speaking to God's people Israel as they are in exile. A nation called Babylon has come and taken over, and they forced them into exile. And so this is not really a highlight chapter for God's people. Isaiah is speaking to people who are probably discouraged and disillusioned. They're discouraged because maybe they've made many mistakes that have put them in this situation. They're really disillusioned because God has worked on their behalf before. God has worked miracles for them before, and so why not now? Why do they find themselves in this position now? And just to pause right here at the start, when have you felt that way? Maybe you're someone who is discouraged or disillusioned. Maybe you have made some mistakes that have put you in a certain situation. Or maybe you're disillusioned. Maybe God has worked before, and maybe he feels absent in your life and you're wondering where God is now. And so let's hear what Isaiah would have to say to a people like that, to Israel. So this is Isaiah chapter 43, starting at verse 16. And this is what he says. He says, "This is what the Lord says," because a prophet speaks for God. So this is what the Lord says: "He who made a way through the sea, a path through the mighty waters, who drew out the chariots and horses, the army and reinforcements together, and they lay there, never to rise again, extinguished, snuffed out like a wick." And so this is just the introduction of God. Isaiah really hasn't gotten to the prophecy yet. He's just talking about who God is. So what is Isaiah talking about? Isaiah is clearly referencing the Exodus story, the story of God bringing his own people out of slavery in Egypt, working these huge miracles like parting the Red Sea, things like that. And so this is kind of a milestone story for the people of Israel. You're going to see references to this same story over and over and over again in the Old Testament. God will commonly talk about himself, and he'll say, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt." You'll see that refrain over and over again throughout the Old Testament. And so this is, again, this milestone story where they would be reminded of God's faithfulness in years past. And so they would remember this time. And so it goes on, and then it says, "Forget the former things. Do not dwell on the past. See, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland." And so I read this, and I wonder, why are we not supposed to dwell on the former things? Isaiah has just had this introduction of God where he talks all about the former things, all about the things that God has done for Israel in the past. But now he says, don't dwell on the former things. What is going on in this passage? Well, as I read it, I really think there's a couple of different ways that we can think about the past. The one way that we commonly think about the past is we think about the good old days. And we sometimes long for and wish for the good old days. We want to go back to the good old days, which obviously will never happen. And so this happens in a couple of different ways. You know, as a dad, I can think of all the great times that the great memories that I had when Zoe was an infant, for instance. And so when Zoe was an infant, I could hold her in my arms, and she would fall asleep on my chest, and we had these really, really sweet moments, and I could think about the good old days and just want to go back to those days. But then I would miss out on the joy of raising the 8-year-old that I have now. This girl who loves to read and loves to be so active, and she's in gymnastics and she does so well in school, and I could miss out on this joy because I want to go back to the good old days of what I remembered. Or you could think of the church this way. Maybe you want to go back to the good old days before COVID, for instance. In Georgiana, as I hear, it was maybe about twice the size that it is now. And so maybe we want to go back to those days when it was bursting at the seams. But maybe you're going to miss on the great things that God is doing now, on the new things that God is doing now, because you're wishing for the good old days. There's another way that we can look at the past, though. We can look at the past as evidence of God's faithfulness. Evidence of God's faithfulness that gives us the boldness and the courage to then look ahead at the future, at the new things that are happening, knowing that God will be just as faithful in the future as he has been in the past. And so even in this little chapter, in this little passage, God has this new thing that he is doing that is actually based on his faithful acts in the past, where in the past he split the sea, and now he is making a way in the wilderness, as it says in verse 19. And so God is doing these new things, but if we keep looking back for the good old days, we're going to miss out on the new things that God is doing. And so I love New Year's. I love New Year's not because it's a church holiday. It's not really a church holiday necessarily, but I love it because it is this constant reminder, this annual reminder that our God is a God of new things. Our God is a God of new life, fresh starts, second chances, of making new things out of old things. And so I want to invite you to be on the lookout this year for the new things that God is doing. Not to long for the past, not to mourn for the days before COVID or before whatever it was that maybe threw you off track, but to forget the things of the past and to look for the new things that God is doing, the new things that God is inviting you into, inviting me into, inviting us into, the new thing that God is doing in your life, in our church, in our community, in our world. God is about doing a new thing, and 2022 is going to be an exciting year. I pray that you are looking for it. So church, I love you. It's going to be an awesome year. Let's do it together.